two questions. In regard to the conversation we had before the meeting, can you give us a couple of examples of the most egregious, mainstream, racist statements in terms of anti-Arab sentiment and anti-Islamic sentiment? And second, can you give us some details about the Joan Peters case and Norman Finkelstein?
Well, I once collected a bunch of egregious
Arab statements and stuck them in a book, and I think they're pretty wild, but nobody doesn't seem to bother anybody. But I would guess if a professor at Harvard, for example, were to describe Jews as people who, so I remember the exact words, people who bleed and breed and advertise their misery, you know, people might think that that's not the right kind of thing for a Harvard professor to say about Jews, you know, saying let's not listen to these guys wail anymore, they're just people who bleed and breed and advertise their misery. But when a Harvard professor says that about Arabs, that's considered fine. If a leading kind of a hero of the left said that New York City is uninhabited because it's got too many blacks and Spanish and not enough whites. It's depopulated, it's underpopulated. Suppose somebody said New York, that's the word, New York's underpopulated. There's a small number of white Christians, but you know, a lot of Jews and blacks and all those people. And we got to do something to overcome the underpopulation of New York. I think people would think there's something funny about that. But when, you know, a hero of the left talks about the underpopulated Galilee, meaning too few Jews and too many Arabs, nobody thinks anything about that. Or when the editor of a leading liberal journal says Arabs lie, you know, it's in their nature, so therefore you don't have to believe what they say, it's part of their culture. Well, he said that about Jews, you know, he wouldn't last very long. If a well-known writer described, talked about Jews and other third world detritus, you know, kind of rubbish, you'd notice it, but not when it's Palestinians, the third world detritus, and on and on. Furthermore, it's just, you know, it's like every report in the newspapers has got this. When Lebanon is bombed, every couple of days you'll notice a little item somewhere saying, you know, Israeli troops killed 7 people in Lebanon. It's not considered an issue. You know. On the other hand, if 7 Jews got killed in Israel, or 7 Americans got killed in New York by a foreign terrorist action, it would be considered something. Actually, I'll give you another example, which is, it's not strictly what you're talking about, but pretty close. The last terrorist bombing in Jerusalem, a couple of weeks ago, remember? The big terrorist bombing, real atrocity in Jerusalem. The same day, and it was the big front page story, you know, agonizing pictures of people suffering and so on. It was, yeah, that's the way you should treat a terrorist bombing. Same day, 4 bombs went off in Havana. Same day, okay. Very similar, tourist places, just like the one in Israel. 4 bombs went off in Havana in tourist places. Italian, fortunately not too many people were killed, but an Italian visitor was killed. His throat, this jugular vein was cut by flying glass. It made the New York Times under World News Briefs, you know, a couple of lines under World News Briefs. Well, then if you follow the story along, the 2 stories along, it's pretty dramatic. The proposal with regard to Israel, supported by the United States, actually I brought it. So let me read the actual words so I don't make it up. I think I brought it. Yeah, here was what it was. When Albright was there, the proposal supported by the United States is that all Palestinian militant groups, what they call them, you know, would have to be outlawed, and there have to be administrative, legal, and police action against military, political, civilian, religious, economic infrastructure, welfare societies, mosques, educational institutions, health centers, banks, investment companies, and etc., which support terror. Okay? So in other words, Israel is supposed to institute a real terrorist regime against anybody who might be regarded as in some fashion or other supporting terror. And the U.S. supports that. Nobody sees anything wrong about it. Take that same phrase and put Miami in instead of Israel. Okay, any humanitarian group or welfare group or bank or anyone else who supports terror in Cuba has to be outlawed without trial, no sentencing, just toss them in jail, break up the group. How far would that go? Well, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the bombings in Havana are, whether they were carried out by, we don't know, but they were certainly supported publicly by groups who continually call for terror and are right sitting there in Miami, all around Florida, in fact. They're not only tolerated, they're loved. Like, Clinton goes and hugs them and kisses them and asks for their money and so on and so forth. And furthermore, they've been carrying on this terror since 1959. Like, it's not just the bombing the day, of the day, happened to be the same day as the Jerusalem bombing. So you can sort of compare the outcomes. But in this case, it's been going on since 1959 from U.S. territory with U.S. government support and, in fact, with direct U.S. government participation. So if involvement, if our own, say, degree of involvement in an act of terror was even a factor in making something newsworthy, the stories would have been reversed. It's the Havana bombings, which would have been on the front page, and the Jerusalem bombings would have been under world news briefs. But it was the other way around. Partly it's racism, but partly it's just that when we do it, it's not terror. It's when we do it, it's fine. When they do it, it's terror. That's the definition of terror. This is an extremely dramatic case. And there are many cases like that. Let me just give you one last one, which is, again, dramatic because of the coincidence. Everybody knows about the Oklahoma City bombing. Okay. So here's this horrible bombing, truck bomb goes off, kills lots of people. If you recall, when the bombing took place, the first thought was it probably had a Middle Eastern connection, remember? So there was all sorts of talk about how, some people say we ought to just bomb the Middle East right away, like Rosenthal in the Times, just bomb the bastard. Others said, well, if we find any Middle East connection, we're going to bomb them. And Clinton got up and said, we'll pursue them to the end of the earth, and so on and so forth. There were big headlines about how Oklahoma City looks like Beirut. Remember that? Big bombs going off and blowing people up. Just horrible. Here's Beirut coming to middle America, and great horror about that. Okay, it turned out there wasn't a Middle East connection. There were people like Rosenthal who said, let's bomb them anyway, but others said maybe not. It's exactly 10 years before the Oklahoma City bombing. We kind of like anniversaries. So exactly 10 years before, almost to the day, a bombing did take place in Beirut. It's one of the reasons why Oklahoma City looked like Beirut. A virtually identical bombing. A car bomb went off right outside a mosque, timed in order to kill the maximum number of people. So timed when they were leaving the mosque. Killed mostly women and children. Lots and lots of women and children killed, babies torn to shreds in their beds. I mean, the whole story. In fact, the Oklahoma City bombing was a virtual duplicate. Now, if we're going to trace the attackers to the end of the earth, we can easily get those guys. That is assuming that the U.S. Air Force has the capacity to bomb Texas and California and maybe a bomb or two left over for London. Because that bombing was carried out by the CIA with the assistance of British intelligence, aiming at a Muslim cleric, Sheikh Fadlallah, who they missed, but they killed plenty of other people instead. So there's a perfect parallel. Now, just out of curiosity, I personally brought that to the attention of a fair number of journalists. They couldn't even see the point. Couldn't even understand what I was talking about. They could not understand why that's even a parallel. I mean, in one case, it's a bomb, maybe Middle Eastern in origin, that's what they thought, going off in Oklahoma City, so we're going to really, bomb them all over the place. And the other case was a bomb that we put in front of a mosque to kill as many people as we could in Beirut, so that's not an act of terror, And that conception is so deeply ingrained in the psyche that people can't see the point. And you can go on with this. I don't know if you call this racism or not. I mean, somehow it's beyond racism, but it incorporates racism as a special case. They were just Lebanese, so what the heck.